11 people want to be Prince George's County's next county executive. They're vying to fill the seat once held by now US Senator Angela Alsobrooks. Early voting begins February 26th, and we've invited all the candidates to join us live in studio so we can talk about the issues impacting residents' lives in Prince George's County. Today, we are joined by Republican candidate Jesse Peed. He's chair of the Prince George's County Republican Central Committee and a small business owner. Mr. Peed, great to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and just dive right in here. You know, I know you're no stranger to politics in Prince George's County, but I wanted to ask you why you want the job.
I guess the job is a little more personal to me than most people because this is where I am from. This is my home. And I've been a lot of places. I lived in Hawaii for a while. I was in the Army for 3 years. Spent a little bit of time in Louisiana, Mississippi. But this is always my home. And I married my high school sweetheart, and she lives on the property that she was born and raised on. And I live 5 miles from where I was born and raised. So I own some property here and I like to stay here.
Let's talk about some of your top concerns for the county that come to mind. What are 2 or 3 for you?
Biggest concern for me is us being taxed out of our livelihoods and our homes, because we're at the point now where Prince George's County taxpayers can't afford to pay any more taxes. And unfortunately, they go up every year because our property taxes go up every year. They do our property assessment, so I get a property assessment, the taxes go up this year, the assessment for next year goes up again, then it goes up another, and then they do another assessment. So every 3 years it goes up every year.
Well, let's talk about money, because we know that's a big sticking point here for the state and the county. With Prince George's County facing a budget crisis, a budget deficit projected at $170 million in the next year, we do anticipate that to potentially worsen. Beyond saying that you want to balance the budget, how would you do that?
First thing I do is, like I said, can't raise taxes. So we have to either cut or we have to bring in more businesses. And for me, small businesses are the best. But the easiest way to bring in small businesses is to lower the tax rate that they have to pay, of course, like against all of us. And the other thing is to slow our regulations down that we destroy businesses. 37 years I've been running a business in Prince George's County. So I understand regulations. I understand all of the draconian ways that they take money from us. And right now I'm at the point where I had to borrow money from my own 401k plan to get myself back above water because the last 4 years were so bad. Of course, I didn't want to raise my prices because, just like anything else, if I raise my prices, then it causes my customers problems. So I've had to do that. Now I'm going to have to raise my prices because I have no other choice. It's either that or go out of business.
Well, to that point, you mentioned cuts. That could be one way. And when that comes to mind, I think constituents hear cuts and they immediately go, well, what? What would you propose?
Well, there's always fat in every budget. You know what I mean? And it has to be something looked at across the board. Now, I'm not talking about cutting 25% or anything like that, but try to make a modest cut of 2 or 3%. I mean, the budget only went up 1% this time. But like you said, we got a $170 million deficit. That has to be covered. And you're not going to be able to continue to draw it from taxpayers. I mean, for the first time in American history, the average citizens right now hold $1 trillion worth of credit card debt. So that tells you. I have my son is an electrician. My daughter-in-law is a teacher. Now, they both make good money. My son told me the other day, Dad, I make more money now than I've ever made. We're cutting ourselves back. He sold his pickup truck, bought a smaller vehicle, get better gas mileage. But he's losing. So he had to go down and take a second mortgage on his house to pay his bills off because of the debt that occurred because of the inflation that we're having. And unfortunately, as government spends money, that's where inflation comes from, the biggest part of in our system.
And especially with the state in such a big deficit, which is going to get passed on to some degree to PG County. We're now going to be talking about cuts, what they look like for constituents. I wanted to pivot here slightly. Prince George's County has one of the highest property tax rates in Maryland, as you well know. Yet county residents often complain about things like trash removal, snow removal. I think back to the January snowstorm we had that was mismanaged, for lack of a better way to say it. We had residents complaining. We reported on it extensively. They really were in crisis trying to get out of their neighborhoods. If you're elected, how would you handle something like that?
I was in the United States Army. We always figured that the idea was either you failed to plan or plan to fail. So you plan beforehand, you make sure everybody's in place. I have people that I know that's what they do is snow removal. So you have contractors that remove snow. You also have your county people that remove snow. You also have in the system, the state removes the snow on their highways.
I'm curious, as a constituent, and if you remove yourself from the political field mentally here, as you heard what happened with the snowstorm in January and people having such issues getting their roads plowed, What ran through your mind with that? What could have specifically been done better in that situation?
I think they should have been prepared better before the snowstorm in the first place.
Okay.
You know, you know it's coming, so you make sure that all your people in place and move, and you also make sure that the people that are in charge of it know what they're doing. You know, one of the problems we have in Prince George's County or Maryland as a whole is, you know, we have years we don't have snow. So it kind of leaves us at well, what did we do last time? Well, last time we didn't do anything because we didn't have snow. So we can go a number of years and not have a snowstorm like we've had. But, you know, most of the snowstorms have been minor. I mean, the first one, and it also depends on the type of snow that we get, of course.
Right, but that's probably not satisfactory to someone who gets, you know, snowed in and doesn't have their roads plowed, right? So you're saying that you would have a plan in place, and that would include some of the things you've touched on, which are
be prepared for the snowstorm. Okay. You know it's coming. You know it's coming. You make sure you have your people in place.
Let's talk about juvenile crime. It's been a major concern between carjackings, car thefts. They're primarily committed by juveniles, some of the data shows, which is making up the majority of arrests. How are you going to manage this problem?
Well, you got to hold people responsible for what they do, which is always a plus. You can't just keep smacking them on the hand and tell them it's okay. We have no discipline in schools. I've read the blueprint for excellence in education, which was the Kerwin Commission twice. One sentence in the blueprint says, as it comes for discipline, we can do nothing. If you can't discipline people, then they get to the point, especially when they're going through school, that they don't have the idea that there are consequences for their actions. And if you don't have consequences for your actions, you do anything that you want. And then when you do have consequences, they're surprised.
So I'm hearing you say you would take a tougher stance on crime. Am I saying that correct? Okay, well, what about something like increased community programs? You know, we know there's a bit of a disconnect here where kids are maybe in school and then they maybe try to go get a job later down the road. There's a bit of a gap in terms of there's crimes committed. How do you manage, again, the juvenile crisis beyond, hey, we need to just be tough on crime?
Well, not just tough, also, you want police community engagement. A lot of people talk about this, but one of the things, send police into classrooms to talk to children and when they get to their age about what the consequences of what their actions are and why it's not acceptable.
Okay. To kind of expand on your point here, when you think about public safety, that requires people, requires personnel. We know that Prince George's County Police has reported recently they're trying to fill about 300 vacancies. How would you help with recruitment efforts, let's say?
Well, I know that everybody else seems to think the best way to do is pay them more, which would be fine. But the state of Maryland didn't help us either when they took away the policeman's Bill of Rights. Kind of makes it hard to do your job when you could be worried about you do your job just like you're supposed to. And then on the other side, the civil side, they're going to sue you and take everything that you have. I think Prince George's County might be able to look into a way to maybe find a type of insurance plan for them so they don't get caught in this particular trap.
So day one in office, if you're getting pressed from, hey, we have high juvenile crime rates on one side, and then on the other flip side of the coin, you have police saying, hey, we can't fill these vacancies. Where are you in the middle? What do you do? How do you solve?
Well, they've been trying to fill the vacancies, for as far as I know, for the last 4 or 5 years because I keep seeing their signs. Okay, I don't think it's a pay discrepancy. It's the fact that we do not back our police up, and we're going to leave them in the cold that if they do their job and they're able to be sued, nobody wants to do their job and then lose everything they have because of the civil suit.
Let me say it back to you. So you feel the police are not being empowered enough to do their job?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're afraid to do their job. I mean, nobody wants to get into a high-speed chase or end up shooting somebody because of the fact that the family or themselves will get sued for it and they'll lose their home and everything they have.
How would you tangibly change that?
Well, first thing you should have done, the law that was passed in our legislature shouldn't have been passed such a way. Okay, and you know, we have boards that are watching the police and they do their job, okay, and we've created them in every one of the counties. But now to take away their Bill of Rights and leave them susceptible to being sued, I wouldn't want to do that job. You know, it's not like, you know, I own a pool business, so I have insurance. So if I mess up something, I'm insured. It pays for that. Police, now they've lost their bills, so somehow or another they're going to have to find a way to insure themselves so that they're willing to take the job. I wouldn't want to take a job that like I said, would lose everything that I own. That would be unacceptable to anybody.
Let's talk about 62% of Prince George's County's budget is dedicated to public education. we still have performance issues, as we've been kind of touching on. How do you propose, balancing the budget? Where's the money going to come from? And then how do you also propose this issue that we have with education?
Well, the blueprint for education, as a state senator told me one time, he didn't think it was going to close the gap. The other problem is you say that our children can't read and write. The first thing you have to do is start teaching them to read and write.
Well, let me back you up, because you touched on something I thought was interesting. So the blueprint for Maryland's future, which was meant to significantly increase public education funding for that, it was passed in the state legislature, but it did not have a designated revenue source.
Correct.
Any thoughts on that? How would you propose we correct something like that if you're in office?
Well, they shouldn't have passed it in the first place if they couldn't pay for it. Their idea was that they were going to pay for it in the short term and then push it onto the counties.
Do you think they're investing too much in education? 62%.
I don't know if you could call it too much in education. I think that the amount of money that they're spending may be a little bit much. They're not spending enough time with the right amount of curriculum that they're teaching our children. Like they said, they can't read and write, but if you're going to teach a child to read and write, you have to teach them to read and write. They're not teaching our children to write.
They're not?
No, they don't teach children to write, print, type, not write.
So
cursive, the old style?
I do, but I'm a millennial.
Yes, ma'am, I know, but they don't teach it in school. Most of the schools nowadays are not teaching this.
Your point, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that you feel it's inadequate what they're learning in school.
Well, yes, ma'am.
They're not getting what they need.
There's a couple other reasons, too, that when you think about it, if you look at all the statistics that come out, a child that learns how to write, retention is 4 times higher than looking at a computer, okay? Using a book. We don't give our children books in schools anymore. You go into I've been to a couple classrooms because I've been invited, and they have a book, but it's underneath their chair. They don't take a book home.
So what's the root cause there, and how do you address that, in your opinion?
I think it's the curriculum and the idea of the way that they're trying to teach our children. Instead of going back to what worked, they're trying to do something that's not working, and they're not being able to figure out that it's not working. So if you want our children to learn, you're going to have to. 60 years ago, our children would go to school, and if they were on the high side of learning, they would learn how to speak and write Latin. Now they can't speak or write English. Okay. They can't read a clock.
I wanted to ask you, we know it's tough to win, right, as a Republican in Prince George's County. I don't have to tell you this, you've been in politics for quite some time there, but it's not impossible, right? We know Wayne Curry was elected in '94. He served 2 terms as county executive. What would you propose to voters? Why should they vote for you? Why should they put you in office?
Well, for one thing, I bring common sense to the board. And the other part about me is I don't like to spend other people's money. I don't like it when people spend my money. The only person I really allow to do that's my wife. Unfortunately, our government spends it better than she does.
How do you work if you're elected as a Republican, how do you work with this ironclad field of Democrats, so to speak? How do you make progress?
Well, I think you have to use common sense with them, too. I mean, at one point, they got to figure out we can't continue at a $170 million deficit and have a budget that's $5.4 billion. I mean, our budget, 3 or 4 years ago was only 2 point, you know what I mean? So they continue to move our budget up. Unfortunately, government spending creates inflation, and that's what we have. We have a problem with inflation, and we spend too much money. Now, I mean, I was listening last night to something. We spent $50 million to start small businesses in Prince George's County, which is sounds wonderful, absolutely, positively wonderful. But the only problem is small businesses, like anything else, fail within the first year, most of them. Now, if they get past the first year, they fail within the first 5 years. So how much of the $50 million that they spent actually created businesses at last that we were actually able to tax?
So that's what you're looking for here if you're elected. You want to really appeal to small businesses. You want to do some education reform is what I'm hearing. And what else, as you have this chance to talk to voters, what have I missed?
I'd have to think about it in the sense, I mean, we've got a lot of issues in Prince George's County that we're having to fight against. And automatic tax increases are one of our problems.
What happens if you lose the commanders?
I think anything can be replaced. I don't know what we're going to do with a stadium that's sitting there that actually belongs to them.
How do you recruit new businesses if you lose something as big as an organization like the Commanders? What's your proposal on that in a nutshell?
I think I would try to find somebody that would want that stadium. I mean, otherwise it's going to be stuck there doing nothing. Also, we should be able to utilize it for other things. Other business, I mean, we can't get another football team, I wouldn't think. Unless the Ravens want to move, I don't think that's
well,
going to happen.
That would be something, wouldn't it?
I would hope that we wouldn't lose the Commanders, as you say. The problem with that is you have to, of course, talk to them and find out where it is they're coming from and what they want. The only problem we have with this particular negotiation is the fact is they're so set on moving to the district, there's not much we really could do.
To that point, they're set, but it is not an ironclad deal yet. Mr.
Right.
Pede, we certainly appreciate your time. Thank you
Thank
for joining
you.
us here today. Thank you. And just a reminder, early voting in Prince George's County begins February 26th. The primary is March 4th. The general election will be on June 3rd. And tomorrow at 4:30, we will be joined by Democratic candidate Ron Hunt. We'll be back after the break.